So, I decided to hop on the bandwagon of people talking about the Rust trademark controversy that's going on right now. My opinion thus far is basically that people are overreacting and have too little to talk about right now. But to give myself a better idea of exactly why people are so upset and give myself my own view on this, I'm going to just read through the entire policy, basically, and we'll see, what I think about it. So, this is a call for comment for the Rust trademark overview FAQ and policy April of 2023. So that's like now. I think this was released yesterday. Off the top, just starting off, it's a call for comments. A call for comments within Rust basically means we haven't done anything yet. We need comments on this. So that alone says that people are overreacting if they think that this is so horrible, because literally what this is, they made like a draft and they're hoping to get some feedback. This is not in any way, shape, or form as bad as the OGL with Hasbro like a couple months ago. That was a train wreck. This is them trying to reach out as early as possible with feedback. And they are trying to make things more restrictive, and whenever you make something more restrictive, people are gonna be upset because people don't want to be restricted. But anyway, let's just get into it. Rust trademark policy. Plain English summary. This legal policy contains important information throughout, and we encourage you to read it in full. As the steward for the Rust programming language, the Rust Foundation holds the trademarks for Rust and Cargo. The Rust Foundation wants the Rust project and Rust language communities to be able to use the trademarks how they want in good faith, as much as possible. We love that you love Rust and want it represented in your projects. These guidelines will help you do that. We also recognize that legal documents aren't written in everyday language and might not be easily digestible for everyone. As such, the contents in this section aims to summarize the key points that we'd like you to take away from the document in plain English. So that's good. We're getting the plain English version first. I'll dig into the entire document, but let's start with the plain English one. A note on policy enforcement. The Rust Foundation's trademark policy exists to protect the work of the Rust project and Rust communities, and to ensure that the Rust language is not devalued, diluted, or co-opted through misrepresentation or policy infringement. The Rust Foundation has no desire to engage in petty policing or frivolous lawsuits. We will, however, defend the Rust trademarks robustly where we feel their use or misuse have been deliberate, egregious, or in bad faith. In short, we will take a reasonable and proportional approach to enforcing the policy. So already they are taking a very safe route I feel with the language used, because they're telling you straight up, you have, in order for them to even bother going after you, if you know, because the one of the big things here that I know of is the crate naming, and in order for them to bother going after you, you have to misuse their name. It has to be deliberate, egregious, or in bad faith. There has to be something you've done wrong with the crate to the point where you are damaging the Rust reputation. This would be, for example, if you've made a virus and you're calling it Rust's STD or like Rust standard library, whatever you want to call it. If you use the Rust name, they feel like this is, you know, a nice name to have, in like a privilege to have that name as part of your crate. And in order for them to take any action against you, you must have misused that name one way or another. Otherwise, they're not going to go after you. They don't care about enforcing this in every single case. Having talked to other people who actually work within trademark enforcement, there's no way you have the energy to go after all of these cases. So just right there, it says, don't worry so much. We're not gonna go after you because, you know, in part, for the most part, there's not gonna be any money in it, and hiring lawyers is expensive. So why would they go after some random person that decided to, for funsies, make a Rust crate, or, you know, called Rust? Or what if someone has a long-going Rust crate that is called Rust something, and it's loved by many? Why would they go after that crate? The answer is they wouldn't. It's still a foundation with people that are reasonable. They have literally said at the start, we're not going to go after everyone. Quick trademark policy reference for common use cases. Selling goods. Unless explicitly approved, use of the Rust name or logo is not allowed for the purposes of selling product/promotional goods for gain/profit, or for registering domain names. For example, it is not permitted to sell stickers of the Rust logo in an online shop for your personal profit. This part, so many people get wrong what this means, because they can't copyright or trademark the Rust name as in the regular English word. I heard someone say that Monster Energy is going out after Monster Hunter or something like that, because they use the name Monster, and Monster Energy has the trademark for Monster. No, trademarks don't work like that. You have a trademark for using Monster, or in this case Rust, within software. You can have other products, other areas where you're allowed to use the name again. I'm not a lawyer. All my opinions are my own. I don't represent anyone when I say this, and all I can say is that, as far as I know, trademarks cannot be enforced in this way. As an example, the Monopoly game. Monopoly and Hasbro tries to enforce their ownership of Monopoly quite rigidly. But the fact of the matter is that their trademark is for the Monopoly name in the context of tabletop gaming. They don't own the word. So, and they don't even own anything other than the design of the box and the exact print of the rules and the board game and the little pieces. That's why they make so many different versions. You can find like one piece of Monopoly out there and all kinds of different versions. And that's because they don't own Monopoly as a concept. They just own their brand, that name. Rust as a name. There's a game called Rust. I'm 100% certain that if you sell Rust, as in the game, merchandise, the Rust Foundation can't go after you because they don't own the word. They own specifically within their realm. That is where they own it. So you would have to, for example, use the Rust name within a context that makes it obvious that it is the Rust Foundation that you are referring to. If it is not obvious that it's the Rust Foundation, if you could be talking about just regular Rust, then they don't suddenly own the name or the word Rust. So, selling goods, you can still use the Rust word. Like the Rust name is what they're talking about. The Rust name they own within their realm. So within software development, they can own the Rust name. Not within game development. Not if you want to make a Rust energy drink, go for it. You can't use their logo either because they own the logo. So this won't really affect pretty much anyone. Some people will have used the logo and whatnot for their products. I'm sorry to say that, yeah, that was a bad idea from the start because you don't own any kind of rights to their logo or the name or whatever. So the big thing here is just, if you're making merchandise right now that is specifically referring to the Rust Foundation, yeah, then you might be in trouble. But otherwise, this won't affect anyone else. So I don't see why anyone would be upset about this other than the people who have actually made a bad life choice of using someone else's logo or name. So this is just fair. Showing support of Rust. When showing your support of the Rust project on a personal site or blog, you may use the Rust name or logo as long as you abide by all the requirements listed in the policy. You may use the Rust name or logo in social media handles, avatars, and emojis to demonstrate Rust project support in a manner that is decorative, so long as you don't suggest commercial Rust affiliation. This, again, perfectly fine. I know some people talked about like little emojis on Discord. They've already covered that. It's perfectly fine. You are allowed to use them like that. You're allowed to use them for your social media profiles. You're allowed to do whatever the heck you want. That is just little pieces of personal decoration. As long as you don't suggest you have a commercial affiliation. Commercial affiliation means that you are actually directly working together with Rust. So, I mean, if you say that you are from the Rust Foundation, that is when they have an issue, because then you are misrepresenting yourself and them. But otherwise, if I just want to show support by having a little Rust logo on my profile, that's fine. So, showing support of Rust, we're still allowed to show support of Rust. Great. Inclusion of the marks in educational materials. You may use the Rust name in books and articles, plural, in book and article titles, and the logo in graphic components, so long as you make it clear that the Rust project or foundation has not reviewed, approved, endorsed your content. Yeah, that seems perfectly fine. Again, you're not allowed to misrepresent yourself. You can't say that you have made this authorized by the Rust Foundation, because then it seems like you are an expert that they have certified somehow. So if you want to make educational material of any kind, you're going to have to be careful a little bit about how you say that this is for Rust and how you portray yourself as working with Rust. But I mean, you can still write the Rust word, you can reference the Rust Foundation and everything. There's nothing in here that says you can't make books and whatever material you want for educational materials. So, no reason to be upset there. Ferries. Ferries is freely available for anyone to use. You do not need our permission. And that is because the Rust Foundation doesn't own Ferries. Ferries, which, if you don't know, it's the little crab. My social media handle on most places are a version, a blue version of Ferris, and the foundation doesn't own Ferris at all. So the only reason they add this part is to avoid questions. They're not saying they own Ferris and you're allowed to use it. They're saying we don't own it. We can't tell you what to do with it. Do whatever you want. And Ferris is under the public domain, as far as I know, which means that I can use Ferris in the way I have, and it doesn't, this won't change that. RS. RS can be used freely and without permission to indicate that software or a project is derived from or based on Rust, compatible with Rust, inspired by Rust, or can be used for the same purpose as Rust. We recommend using RS instead of Rust if you have any concerns about your use falling outside of this policy. For example, naming your crate foo.rs instead of rust-foo. This is the biggest one that people are getting the most upset about, but the reason you should get upset about this one, it has nothing to do with them wanting to protect the Rust name. Plenty of organizations want to protect that name, like their own name. I'm sure that Microsoft has a grudge with the guy on Crates.io that owns the Microsoft name. All they're saying here is that if you don't know if your crate or whatever you make is okay being called Rust, use RS instead, because here they're giving you more permission, kind of like with Ferris. They're saying they don't own just RS. They don't own that, so they can't tell you what to do. Use that if you're ever uncertain. For more details on specific software use cases and important expanded details on the scenarios above, please consult the full Rust Foundation trademark policy. Questions. This policy should cover the majority of questions about what you can and cannot do with the Rust trademarks. But if you have a question or concern not covered here, or you would like to ask permission for a special license, please get in touch with us at trademark@rustfoundation.org. Please note that we cannot provide legal advice. Which basically means that the people you're going to be reaching are people like me who aren't lawyers, but they can give you permission to use the trademark. And I know I said this one was important, but we're going to get back to that later anyway, so let's just continue. Rust trademark FAQs. Can I use the Rust logo as my Twitter avatar? We consider social media avatars on personal accounts to be fair use. On the other hand, using Rust trademarks in corporate social media bios profile pictures is prohibited. So what this means, as far as I know, or as far as I can tell, is that maybe on LinkedIn it might be an issue, but it's really just if you're doing something commercial at all, if you're saying that, you know, on LinkedIn, hi, I'm working for this company, then it's no longer a just personal fun project. Then you're representing your company, and companies need permission, is what they're saying. If you're just a random person or an open source developer or whatever, you can use their logo however you want. It's, you know, for social media purposes. You just can't use it if you're in a corporate setting. This is gonna be really hard for them to enforce, I believe, but what they're really meaning by this is just if you're in any kind of commercial setting, don't make it seem like your company is officially endorsed by the Rust Foundation. And as long as you don't make it seem like you're officially endorsed, then you're probably fine. Can I use a modified version of the logo on social media? In general, we prohibit the modification of the Rust logo for any purpose, except to scale it. This includes distortion, transparency, color changes affiliated with for-profit brands or political ideologies. On the other hand, if you would like to change the colors of the Rust logo to communicate allegiance with the community movement, we simply ask that you run the proposed logo change by us by emailing the file to contact@rustfoundation.org with a description of the changes you're proposing. In the future, we intend to publish new versions of the Rust logo to accord with community movements. For example, LGBTQIA+, Jesus Christ, that abbreviation has gotten long, Pride Month, Black Lives Matters, etc. This one basically just says, don't mess up our logo. And if you want to mess it up, email us. Let's compare this, because I know some people were upset about this, but let's compare that with something like Google. Do you think that you can do this with Google or Apple, for that matter, or the Windows logo? Do you think they allow you to do it at all? Because that's the other side of this that a lot of people aren't thinking about. They have to compare it with something. In this case, they're saying, hi, yeah, send your proposal to us, we'll take a look at it, and most likely we'll say yes, is basically what they're saying. Now, whether or not it's true that they'll basically say yes to anything is a bit, weird, but they basically just want the ability to say, no, you're not allowed to, I don't know, be devil worshippers using the Rust logo or something like that. I don't know exactly what they would be opposed to. No, we don't want you to be modifying it for goat slaughter or something. So they just want the opportunity to say no. And you can very easily just email it to them and they'll say yes or no, if it's okay. You can't do that with all other companies that you have out there. If you want to make a custom Apple version for your app, I don't think there's a single email out there that goes directly to Apple where you can just, hey, I want to modify the Apple logo. Is that fine? So they're being very accommodating with this. So yeah, I approve of this as well. I am running an event and I want to print some merch with the Rust logo on them to give away as swag. People will be paying for the tickets, but not specifically for the swag. Is this okay? Merch developed for freebies/giveaways is normally fine. However, you need approval to use the Rust word and or logo to run a for-profit event. You are free to use Ferris the Crab without permission. Here they just again make sure that you are aware that the crab is off. They don't own the crab. They don't own Ferris. You can do whatever you want with Ferris. And again, if you use the Rust word, you can use the Rust word. It just can't refer to the Rust Foundation. So let's say you were to make a black shirt with just a white text saying Rust on it. They can't actually enforce anything regarding that. They literally can't. It's just a word. That's the problem for a company using everyday English words as their names. Like, I don't know who decided to put it this way, because it's just wrong. They can't. They don't have that trademark to just white text Rust on your shirt. That's not enforceable at all. It's just a word. But within certain contexts, if it becomes, or with a certain style, and if you add something like Ferris on it, now the context makes it obvious that it's them you're referring to, which means that as long as you don't add enough context for it to be an issue, there won't be an issue, because they can't enforce it. This is the biggest problem I have with them so far. They're trying to really get that Rust word, not just the Rust Foundation, but the Rust word copyrighted to the point where you can't use it, and it's a bit delusional. You can't enforce it, and the only thing you have a trademark for is the exact context of software development. yes, you have, you know, I can't make shirts of it, but then if I make a shirt with that word on it, the context has to be made obvious by, for example, copying the font that you're using for your name. Or I can add Ferris the Crab somewhere, and that would add context. So be careful about context, but, you know, they can't take the word from you. I'm running an event for which I am charging attendees for tickets. Can I use the Rust logo on my promotional materials? If your event is for profit, you will need approval to use the Rust name or logo. If you are simply covering costs and the event is non-profit, you may use the Rust name or logo as long as it is clear that the event is not endorsed by the Rust Foundation. You are free to use Ferris the Crab without permission. So again, if you use RS or Ferris the Crab, you are perfectly fine. It's just the Rust name. I believe it actually has to be the capital R, Rust, even. So, yeah, and again, this is only applicable if you are making money. If you are not for profit, you can even charge money for the tickets, but as long as you're a non-profit event, in other words, you can take money for tickets, but all the money, like 100% of the money, has to go towards paying for, you know, equipment and stuff. Then it's still non-profit, and you can use their name and logo however you want, is basically what they're saying, which is actually really generous. Not all companies allow you to do that. I am running an event that is free to attend. Can I use the Rust logo on my promotional materials? Yes, you may use the Rust name and logo as long as it is clear that the event is not endorsed by the Rust Foundation. This is just repeating what they just said. Yeah, you can use it as long as you make sure that it's clear in the material that they aren't part of making this event happen. I would like to sell stickers/merch that includes a Rust trademark and donate part of the proceeds to my favorite projects. Is this allowed? As this would be a commercial use of the Rust name or logo, you would need our approval to do this, and would need to develop a transparent arrangement for donating the funds. So yeah, this is perfectly fine as well with me, because all they're saying is anything you do that's for profit in any way, shape, or form. Because remember, donations are also a form of profit. Even though you're doing it for a good cause, even though you're donating it to save the children or something, it's still profits for that organization, and you are still taking in money. And if you want to do that and you're honest about your intentions, then you have to have a transparent arrangement, which is something like an open collective sort of deal. And you're gonna need approval to use their name and logo for it, because you're making it for profit. But they're basically saying, yeah, you can probably do it, but you're gonna have to talk to us first. Which, again, I'm perfectly fine with. Can I use the word Rust in the name of one of my crates? The project would like the word Rust in a crate name to imply ownership by the project. You should generally use -RS instead in this situation. Please see use of the marks in toolchains or other software for use with Rust section. So yeah, this is, again, one of the biggest things that people have a gripe with. And the reason people have a gripe with this, primarily, I feel, or at least the most valid reason to have a gripe with this, is that it implies a need to change names of crates. So crates.io, in general, or as a rule they have, crates are not allowed to change names, or at least they shouldn't. The idea is that when you've published a version of a crate, that is permanent, and anyone can depend on it and assume that that will exist forever. That is like a foundational part of crates.io. So here they're saying, oh, we would like to make a change to the policy that means that people will have to change names. And yeah, that goes against the core principle of crates are forever. And that is the biggest gripe people can have that is actually valid. Just being upset that you can't call your project Rust, I don't see why people would be upset about that. I have no problem with using RS instead. RS is so closely tied with Rust that just write -rs instead. That I don't see that as an issue. And I fully understand wanting to protect your brand name and your trademark. But yeah. I am producing educational materials, tutorials, blogs, videos, etc. Can I use Rust marks in these? If so, what are the stipulations? You can use the Rust name in books and article titles and the logo in illustrations within the work, as long as the use does not suggest the Rust Foundation has published, endorsed, or agrees with your work. We require this to be stated upfront, i.e. before the first paragraph or page of your work in a clear and dedicated space. You may use the following language or a close variation of it. Disclosure. The material in this book, page, blog, article are not reviewed, endorsed, or approved by the Rust Foundation. For more information on the Rust Foundation trademarks policy, click here. So, this is a little bit tricky to understand exactly what they mean, because it kinda contradicts what they've said before. Because earlier they said that you are free to use it, and here they say you're free to use it if you have a disclaimer. I don't know if this is an oversight or what it is, but it does mean that if I want to use, say I wanted to add their Rust logo into this video, I would have to write in the description a disclaimer that this is not approved or owned or anything by the Rust Foundation. That is a little bit tricky to me. I understand why, but at the same time, I just feel like it's a little weird. It should be enough that it's a non-profit tutorial, blog, video, whatever. I shouldn't have to put a disclosure. But then again, I only use Ferris. This doesn't apply to me, but I do understand that this part will apply to people. Though again, all they're really asking you to do is adding something like this to the video description if you're on YouTube. It's not a huge deal, but it's gonna be annoying for people to comply with. But just to be clear here on how enforcing something like this works with something like if it's in a YouTube video, they can't just straight up copyright strike your video. They have to reach out to you first, or rather, they will reach out to you somehow first. Exactly how they reach out to you, I can't say. Maybe they'll hit you up in comments or something like that. I don't know, but somehow they'll try to contact you. So try to keep your contact information somewhat readily available, or at least a Twitter handle or something like that. But they'll try to reach out to you before they do anything. So if you have a lot of existing videos that use the Rust marks, then just wait for them to reach out to you. Probably they never will, and if they do, all they really want you to do is add a disclaimer at the bottom of your description. So I wouldn't be too afraid of this one, but it's a little weird and annoying, both for us and them, and I don't see why they would even bother with this. Because you've already qualified this as being educational materials. It's another thing if you're on, say, Udemy, and you're making a Udemy course on Rust. Then it gets a little bit tricky. Because then you're making something for profit, and for profit stuff, it's perfectly fine that they want to protect themselves one way or another. Is it possible to get the educational materials I create reviewed and approved by the Rust Foundation and/or the Rust project? The Rust Foundation does not currently have a system for official review approval of community educational resources. With that said, you are free to send drafts to our team if you have individual fair use questions pertaining to this policy. So what this basically means is that yes, you can get approved, they just don't have a system for it. That means that probably that contact email you saw earlier, that's probably where you would have to reach out to them and hopefully you can get approval. And it's not certain you'll get approval, of course, and they don't have a proper system yet for it. But yeah, if you're making something educational, just use RS, fairies, or add a disclaimer, and you'll be fine. You don't need to reach out to them, but if you want to be officially endorsed and be able to put that somewhere, hey, this was officially approved by Rust, then you need to reach out to them, for which they don't currently have a system, unfortunately. I work for a member organization of the Rust Foundation. What does this mean in terms of our usage of the Rust trademarks? As a Rust Foundation corporate member, you are permitted to list your membership status with reference to the Rust marks on websites, blogs, social media profiles, etc. However, the full extent of this policy applies to all individuals or organizations, regardless of their Rust Foundation membership status. So yeah, they're basically just saying, just because you work for the Rust Foundation doesn't mean you're excluded. Everyone is subject to this policy. Your membership status. So yeah, you're allowed to say that you're a part of the Rust Foundation, but you're not allowed to say that your works are suddenly officially approved just because you're a member. You still need to go through official channels just like everyone else. I am a member of one of the Rust project teams. What does this mean in terms of my usage of the Rust trademarks? As a member of a Rust project team, you are permitted to list this status with reference to the Rust name and logo on websites, blogs, social media profiles, etc. However, the full extent of the blah, 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 blah. So literally the same answer as above. Just because you work for the Rust organization in any way, shape, or form doesn't mean you're excluded from this policy. Everyone is hit by this trademark policy. Can I use Rust as part of the name for my project, product, initiative, etc. in reference to the Rust language? Generally, no, it is not permitted to use the Rust name or logo as part of your own trademark, service mark, domain name, company name, trademark, product name, or service name. If you already have a product, initiative, etc. that uses the Rust name or logo, get in touch with us. We most likely will be willing to enter into a license agreement with you. The most important thing here to note is etc. in reference to the Rust language. So the R that they have, that is what they're talking about. And they're saying that if you have something that is directly in reference to the language, then it's a trademark dispute. Just like I said before, they don't own the Rust name. You can have Tesla Rust car come out next year if you want. You can have, you know, a lot of stuff can be called Rust without it in any way, shape, or form being touched by their trademark. Which is why they have to qualify here that it's when it's in reference to the Rust language, because that's what they have a trademark for. They have a reference, the Rust name as a software language and foundation. They have the name Rust. They don't have it for everything, which is why if you have something that exists already and it's in reference to the Rust language, yeah, reach out to them and they'll likely want to enter some form of license agreement. Now, this might be paid for, by the way, just so you're aware. They don't say here that the license agreement will be free, but they do say that there is a chance for you to get a license agreement with them if you've already made something that's in reference to the Rust language. So that's good. Am I prohibited from registering my own trademark, a domain name, company name, trade name, product name, service name that includes the word Rust in reference to the language? The use of the Rust Foundation trademarks is not permitted for use in any of these situations. Where there is any disagreement between the plain English summary or the FAQs and the Rust trademark full policy below, the Rust trademark full policy will control. This basically just says that we've tried to make the plain English version as understandable as possible, but the legal lingo is important. The full policy is what applies if you were to go to court. What it says in the plain English version does not matter whatsoever in any way, shape, or form. It's the full policy that matters. Because you gotta remember that if you use the plain English one, I mean, you have to read all the way down to this part where it actually says everything above is invalid if it goes against what's below. So, but in reference to this last point they had, again, with the other one, in reference to the language. It has to be in reference to the language for the trademark to even apply. If it's not in reference to the language, then you're fine. So now we're getting into what seems to be 13 pages of the actual legal linguistics. And if you don't want me to just sit here and read it, if you don't want to listen to that, then tap out now. Because I'm mostly just gonna read this start to finish. And there's not gonna be that much opinion about this because I'm not a lawyer. I'm pretty much just gonna read this and hopefully maybe a comment or two here if I think something sounds weird, but I'll try to focus on just reading this. Rust trademark policy. Contents. Rust trademark policy. Introduction. Trademark subject to the guidelines. Universal considerations for all uses. Use for software. Use for non-software goods and services. General information. General considerations about trademarks and their use. Introduction. The Rust Foundation is an independent non-profit organization established to steward the Rust programming language. It owns and manages the Rust trademarks, which covers the Rust programming language and software. As developed by the Rust project teams, the project, this document, the policy, outlines the Rust Foundation's policy for the use of the trademarks. While Rust software is available under a free and open source software license, the copyright license does not include an implied right or license to use the Rust trademarks. This policy provides guidance on when and how you may use the trademarks owned by the Rust Foundation. The role of trademarks is to provide assurance about the quality of the products or services with which the trademark is used. However, because an open source license allows your unrestricted modification of the copyrighted software, we cannot be sure that your modifications to the software are ones that will not be misleading if the software is then distributed under the same name or services that are offered using the Rust trademarks. Instead, this policy describes the circumstances under which you may use the trademarks. This is basically stating that they don't have a blacklist, they have a whitelist, because a blacklist would be too long. It's better to have a whitelist. So they're just saying these are situations when it's okay to use it, instead of saying all the cases where it's not okay. In this policy, we are not trying to limit the lawful use of the trademarks, but rather describe for you what we consider the parameters of lawful use to be. Trademark law can be ambiguous, so we hope to provide enough clarity for you to understand whether we will consider your use non-infringing, licensed, or one that we might consider infringing without obtaining specific permissions from us. The goal of the following section is to list and describe the trademarks that this policy covers, trademark use that is allowed without additional permissions from us. If you want to use our trademarks in ways that are not described in this policy, please see where to get further information below for contact information. While we strive to make the policy as comprehensive as possible, any use that does not comply with this policy, or for which we have not separately provided written permission, is not a use that we have approved, So you must decide for yourself whether the use is nevertheless lawful. So again, they have a white list, not a black list. The difference, if you're not aware, is that a white list specifies all the cases where it's okay. A black list specifies all the cases where it's not okay. So basically they're saying, if your use case is not on this list, it means that it's on the blacklist. So read this if you're concerned, and if you don't find your use case, it's not allowed. It might be allowed, but it's not explicitly allowed. So you might have to contact them and ask them about it. 1.1. Our commitment to open source principles. We know that Rust communities around the world want to be able to use the trademarks, and we are committed to encouraging and facilitating the use of our trademarks as much as we can, while ensuring they remain meaningful as a source of quality indicator for our software, our associated goods and services, and our community. Primarily, we want to ensure that our trademark guidelines protect the work and interests of the Rust communities. This policy therefore tries to strike the proper balance between the need and desire of community members and users to support Rust and prevent the misuse of the trademarks in ways that harm the community and Rust users. Our hope is that everyone will respect our marks and all that they stand for by following this policy. For those who do not, we will do our best to try to reach an amicable resolution in order to avoid the last resort of any potential adversarial measures, which basically means they want to avoid lawsuits in both directions. So, you know, they hope that this will work out for everyone. Trademarks subject to the guidelines. This policy covers our word trademarks and service marks, the word marks. Mark, description of the good and service. Rust is a registered trademark. Programming language, software, compiler, library, community. So as I was talking about before, with the Rust word, it has to be in reference to something, namely the Rust programming language. If you are making a community and calling it Rust, then their policy here says that they have a copyright or a trademark on Rust as a community, Rust as a library, Rust as a compiler, Rust as a software, Rust as a programming language. Note here that they, for example, don't have Rust as an energy drink. So you can still name stuff Rust. Other things can trademark Rust, but these are the domains where they have established their trademark. Cargo, build system, package manager, Clippy, linting tool. So this is something important as well, because they have only really talked about Rust before. They didn't talk that much about Cargo and Clippy. So these are trademarks, but they're not registered trademarks. I don't actually know how big a difference there is. There is a difference, but I don't know exactly how big. I believe the reason they talk mostly about Rust is because these are less enforceable, I feel. Our logos, the logos. Mark, description again. Insert gear logo. Nice one. Program language, yeah, so basically the same as the above, but they're talking about the Rust logo. And Rust logo. For those of you who have not seen it, this is what they're talking about. So the R logo. I think this is also an official version of it. So there, I inserted it for you. The unique visual styling of our website and packaging, the trade address. This policy encompasses all the above trademarks and service marks, whether word marks, logos, or trade dress, which are collectively referred to as the marks. Some marks may not be registered, but registration does not equal ownership of trademarks. This policy covers our marks whether they are registered or not. So this, for example, is not a registered mark. I believe the logo is registered. It would be weird if it isn't, but their visual styling of their website, that's not a registered trademark in any way, shape, or form. And what they're saying here is that the policy still applies. But with enforceability, they, for example, can't stop you from making a website that looks a certain way. They can, however, try to make a case against you if you make an identical looking website with the purposes of any kind of fraudulent behavior. Like, let's say you're trying to tell people that your fake website is the Rust Foundation website. That might be a case where they would try to say something about the trade dress, I guess. Really weird way to put it there, but they're basically saying they might not have registered trademarks for all of these, but they still, the policy is still something that applies. It's just a question of how enforceable it is. And you can make a policy about something without it being enforceable. They're very different things. For something to be enforceable, it has to be valid in the country you're in, for example. This is why you have so many pirate products and whatnot in, say, China. Because China uses a different trademark. Like, they have their own trademark offices. So your trademark in the US or the EU might not be valid in China. And I don't think it pretty much always isn't. Which is also why they had a boom of so many inventions coming up in China, because they could literally look at an invention being made elsewhere, and that invention hasn't been registered yet in China. It was registered elsewhere, therefore they can just, relicense it. So enforceability is very different from owning the trademarks and having them registered. They're basically saying there might be an issue with our enforceability, but we still apply the policy to them. The trademarks we are not licensing in this policy. The following trademarks are ones that are reserved exclusively for the use of the Rust Foundation and are not covered by the policy. Rust Foundation and RustConf. Contact us as described in where to get further information below if you have questions or want to ask permission to use any of these excluded trademarks. So here they're basically saying that the policy with stuff like the educational material, they said you're allowed to use the Rust word, you're allowed to use the Rust logo, but they don't want you to use Rust Foundation as a name at all, or RustConf without express permission. This might make it seem like they're, locking you down even further, but they're really just saying you can't use the Rust Foundation name ever. You can use Rust though, but you can't say this was made with Rust Foundation, because it wasn't. Freely available for use. The following words, abbreviations, and designs are available for use by anyone consistent with their definition. No special permission is required. Crate. A crate is a unit of compiled code in the Rust language. RS. RS can be used to indicate that the software or project is derived from or based on Rust, compatible with Rust, inspired by Rust, or can be used for the same purpose as Rust. Ferris logo. The mascot for the Rust project. Rustation, used to express that one participates in the Rust project. This was covered earlier. Yeah, perfectly fine. These things you're allowed to use however you want. Universal considerations for all uses. The foundation of the policy. The policy is established to protect the integrity of the Rust trademarks and all those who contribute to and use Rust. Whenever you use one of the marks, you must always do so in a way that does not mislead anyone, either directly or by omission, about exactly what they are getting and from whom. The law reflects this requirement in two major ways, described in more detail below in What Trademark Law is About. It prohibits creating a likelihood or confusion, but allows for nominative use. For example, you cannot say you are distributing the Rust compiler when what you are distributing differs from the version distributed by the Rust project, because people would be confused when they learn they did not get the same features and functionalities they would get if they downloaded the Rust compiler directly from us. You also cannot use our logo on your website in a way that suggests that your website is an official website or that we endorse your website. However, you can say you use and like the Rust software, that you participate in the Rust community, that you are providing an unmodified version of the Rust software, or that you wrote a manual describing how to develop software using Rust. This fundamental requirement that is always clear to people what they are getting and from whom is reflected throughout this policy. It should also serve as your guide if you are not sure about how you are using the marks. So yeah, this basically just means, you can't do anything fraudulent. It's against the law. You can't say that you're getting one thing when you're getting another. So if you make a modified version of the Rust compiler, for example, you're gonna have to call it something else. You can't say that you're giving someone the Rust compiler when they're not getting a Rust compiler. That's literally all they say. You may not use the marks in association with the use or distribution of software if you are also not in compliance with the copyright license for the software. Use or distribution of software if you're also not in compliance with copyright. I guess what they basically mean here is just different software might be distributed under different exact open source licenses, because there's a bunch of them. So you have to also be in compliance with the license of the software. You may not use or register in whole or in part the marks as part of your own trademark, service mark, domain name, company name, trade name, product name, or service name. This one is a little bit weird, but mostly just because it's not so much up to them to enforce. If they have a trademark for this and it's registered, that means that when someone else comes along and tries to register it, then it's up to the registration, it's up to the government basically to say if you can register the trademark or not. It doesn't matter that they don't want you to do it. Like, this doesn't make much sense because it's not up to them to enforce. It's other people that enforce whether or not someone is allowed to use a mark. If I go to the government and say, hey, am I allowed to use the Rust logo? And they say yes, it turns out, yeah, I am allowed to use it because my government says so. So it's not up to the foundation to enforce this, which is why it's weird that it's in here at all. Trademark law does not allow your use of names or trademarks that are too similar to ours. You therefore may not use an obvious variation of any of our marks or any phonetic equivalent, foreign language equivalent, takeoff, or abbreviation for a similar or compatible product or service. We would consider the following too similar to one of our marks: Rost, Rusty, Cargo Net. I wonder what trademark law says on this one, because Rost, at least that is Swedish. Might be other languages too, but in Swedish this is literally Rust translated. And Rusty, pretty sure that can be a name. Cargo Net, definitely, but these two should be up to the trademark agency to decide if they're okay or not. But yeah, what they're saying is that if you use something that's too close and is actually within their domains that they have registered, then they can try to go after you. emphasis here on try, because again, this is where you need a lawyer. If you name a compiler Rust, then yeah, you might be in trouble, but you also have to have a compiler or a library, that's called Rust. And again, as they say at the start of the simple English one, they don't care as long as you don't do anything bad. So it's like, if I make something that's, as long as it's not hurting them, most likely they're not gonna bother going after me if I were to create a community, for example, called Rust. So it's a little bit weird, but yeah. You need a lawyer to know if this is something to be concerned about. You agree that you will not acquire any rights in the marks and that any goodwill generated by your use of the marks inures solely to our benefit. This seems like very legal lingo. Acquire any rights in the marks. I mean, I am acquiring some rights here. As in, I mean, I guess what they're saying is that, I'm trying to interpret this. I'm assuming that what they mean is that it's not your right to use their marks. If they find you to be using it in a bad way, they can explicitly go after you or like specifically go after you even though you're within good use. So even if you're following the policy perfectly, they might say that no, we don't feel like that's a good use of our marks, which means that they may decide to shut you down even though you comply with the policy because you haven't been given any rights. They're just trying to explain to you what you're allowed to do with this. They already have these rights to their marks. They're just explaining to you how you're allowed to use them. They're not giving you rights to them. Just to be clear here, I think. That should be the correct interpretation of what this sentence means. Again, I'm not a lawyer. Use for software. See universal considerations for all uses above which also apply. 4.1 Uses we consider non-infringing. Distribution of unmodified source code or unmodified executable code we have compiled. When you redistribute an unmodified copy of the Rust software, you are not changing the quality or nature of it. Therefore, you may retain the word marks and the logos we have placed on the software to identify your redistribution. Whether that redistribution is made via physical product, physical media, or download, and whether that redistribution consists of unmodified source code or executables. If you auto-generate unmodified documentation created by the project using RustDoc, you do not have to remove any word marks or logos. This only applies if you are redistributing an official distribution from the Rust project that has not been changed in any way. Straightforward. Distribution of executable code that you have compiled or modified code. See cross-reference to, uses which are running in a license. Distribution of modified software. For cases where you may modify the software and use marks and logos for it. You may also use the word marks, but not the logos, to truthfully describe the origin of the software that you are providing. That is, the code you are distributing is a modification of our software. You may say, for example, compiled from the Rust source at GitHub, or that we have included tools taken from the Rust project in our toolchain. You must also remove our logos. Or modified code. Okay. So if you compile a custom version of their project, you can use the words, you can use the word Rust, but you can't use the logo. That seems weird, especially since they have, you know, executable code here or modified code. What if I don't modify the code? I'm just compiling their source code. Do I have to actually go through stripping out any logos generated by that? That seems weird. Oh, that's weird. If you're creating documentation and have modified it, you do not have to remove any word marks or logos that appear in screenshots or in the text for illustrative or explanatory purposes. However, you must remove them where the use suggests that the Rust Foundation has published or endorsed your version of the documentation, such as on the cover. So yeah, same sort of thing we went through before. You can use it, but you have to remove some stuff sometimes. Weird. Of course, you can place your own trademarks or logos on versions of the software to which you have made modifications, because by modifying the software, you have become the origin of that exact version. Seems fair. If you modify their source code, then yeah, you're gonna have to redistribute it under your own name. You can't say it's from them if it's not actually from them. Which I guess to my point where I said if you just compile their source code, I mean, then you are the new compiler of that source code. So you have to state that you are the source of that new executable, I guess. That kind of makes sense, but it's still weird if it's unmodified. Yeah. Statements about compatibility, interoperability, or derivation. You may use the word marks, but not the logos, to truthfully describe the relationship between your software and ours. Our marks should be used after a verb or preposition that describes the relationship between your software and ours. So you may say, for example, the Dungeness tool for the Rust compiler, but may not say the Dungeness Rust compiler, which suggests that Dungeness is the source of the Rust compiler. Some other examples that may work for you are: your software is written by the Rust language, your software can compile software written in Rust, can be used in the Rust toolchain, is based on the official Rust compiler. Seems fair? Rust, the language versus Rust products and project. Rust is the name of a language, the name for software, the name of the project, and the name of the community. It must always be clear which one you are referring to when you use Rust. If there is a possibility of misinterpretation, you should amend your wording so that there can be no misunderstanding. For example, the term Rust compiler can be interpreted as both the compiler distributed by the project and any compiler that can compile the Rust language. If you are not referring to the compiler distributed by the project, you must change the wording to make it clear that this is not the compiler distributed by the project, such as ABC compiler for Rust. I mean, I get it, but I also don't get it, because, I mean, this just seems like everyday English to me. The Rust compiler. Like, I could easily have, like, say I have the Bluefish compiler, and it's capable of compiling Rust code. I mean, I would probably in a tutorial just say run the Rust compiler. But from the bigger context of a video or tutorial, it would be clear that I'm still referring to the Bluefish compiler that I just made up. But it's a little bit weird. I get what they want, but it's weird. Uses for which we are granting a license. Distribution of modified software. You may use the word marks and the logos for the distribution of a modified version of the Rust programming language compiler or the cargo package manager, provided that the modifications are limited to code adjustments for the purpose of porting to a different platform, architecture, system, or integrating the software with the packaging system of the platform, or fixing local paths, or adding patches that have been made available upstream and accepted, or submitted upstream and not yet rejected. But you must remove either the patch or the trademark once the patch has been rejected. A little bit weird, but I also get it, because they're saying that if a change is rejected, you have to know if it's rejected and then basically recompile your software without that modification, even if it fixes something for you. That's weird. Really weird. Uses we consider infringing without seeking further permission from us. Use of the marks in toolchains or other software for use with Rust. Using the marks in the name of a tool for use in the Rust toolchain, a software program written in the Rust language, or a software program compatible with the Rust software will most likely require a license. The RS abbreviation can be used instead. So yeah, just don't call crates Rust dash. Call them RS dash or whatever dash RS. Used for non-software goods and services. See universal considerations. Uses we consider non-infringing. Use of trademarks to show community affiliation. We are very supportive of our global Rust community using the word marks and logos for personal purposes. You may use the word marks and the logos in social media handles, avatars, and emojis to show your support for the project, provided that the use is non-commercial and the use is a comment or clearly decorative, as contrasted with a use that appears to be the branding for a website or application, or any use that suggests endorsement by the Rust Foundation. So basically your social media handles and everything, you know. Yeah, don't suggest that you are affiliated with them when you're not, and if you have a commercial use, you need some form of license. Websites. You may use the word marks and logos, but not the trade dress on your web page to show your support for the project, as long as the website has branding that is easily distinguished from the trade dress. Your own branding or naming is more prominent than any marks. The logos hyperlink to the project website. The site does not mislead customers into thinking that either your website, service, or product is our website, service, or product. And the site clearly states here that you are not affiliated with or endorsed by the Rust Foundation or Rust project. So, yeah, this really just means their website appearance. Try not to copy it and trick people. As long as you're not trying to trick people, it should be fine. Like, basically, you know, the logos should hyperlink to the actual website, so you don't, you know, make a Rust logo and hyperlink to your own stuff, because then that creates a connection between Rust as a foundation and your project, and they don't want to be affiliated with your stuff without having given explicit permission. Publications, presentations, and educational materials. You can use the word marks in book and article titles and the logo in illustrations within the work, as long as the use does not suggest that the Rust Foundation has published, endorsed, or agrees with your work. So again, you can use their stuff however you want. It's the connection that they don't want. They don't care if you use it that much. Uses for which we are granting a license. User groups. We want to support and facilitate Rust user groups. You can use the word marks as part of your user group name, provided that you formally adopt and enforce a robust code of conduct appropriate to your specific user group. The main focus of the group is discussion and education about Rust software. Any software or services the group provides are without cost. The group does not make a profit. Any charge to attend the meetings is to cover the cost of the venue, food and drink only. Note that the universal considerations for all uses above still apply, specifically that you may not use or register the marks as part of your own trademark, service mark, domain name, company name, trade name, product name, or service name. So yeah. Not sure what they mean by Rust user group. I assume they mean stuff like Discord servers, maybe. But moving on. Promotional goods. Promotional goods are non-software goods that use the marks and that are intended to advertise the project, promote the project, or show membership in the project community, such as stickers, socks, key fobs, glassware, etc. You may make promotional goods for free giveaway at open source conferences and events, provided that the goods are in good taste and compatible with the values of the project. This is weird because good taste, I mean, who decides what good taste is? And project values, it's weird. Uses we consider infringing without seeking further permission from us. Events and conferences. Events and conferences are a valuable opportunity to grow your network and learning. Please contact us at where to go for further information below if you would like to hold an event using the marks in the event name. We will consider requests to use the marks on a case-by-case basis, but at a minimum would expect events and conferences using the marks to be non-profit making, focused on discussion of and education on Rust software, prohibit the carrying of firearms, comply with local health regulations, and have a robust code of conduct. Prohibit the carrying of firearms? Americans are gonna go crazy about that one. Where's my whichever amendment it is? Yeah, that is really weird. But yeah, if you're non-profit and you want to use their stuff, go for it. But it should be about Rust if you're gonna use it. And honestly, if you're gonna use their marks for your like name of the venue and whatnot, why wouldn't you make it about Rust? I mean, domain names. We will likely consider using the marks as part of a domain name or subdomain as infringement on our marks. This one, the only way they can enforce this is if the website you make is also related to their domains, as I discussed earlier. If you make rust.se or rust.com or whatever, some domain they don't own, you just have the Rust name in it. They can't claim it from you just because it's called Rust, because it's an English word. You can have Rust in your name. The only way they can enforce this is if the website you've made is related to their domains. Otherwise, they can't enforce it. And again, whatever the policy says, the law is the law, and the policy does not go above the law. The law here states that you don't own the word, you own the trademark. Goods for sale. We would likely consider using the marks as promotional goods for sale and infringement on our marks. Yep, fair enough. General information, trademarks, marketing, and legends. The first or most prominent mention of a mark on a web page, document, packaging, or documentation should be accompanied by a symbol indicating whether the mark is a registered trademark or an unregistered trademark. See our trademarks list above for the correct symbol to use. Also, if you're using our marks in a way described in the sections, uses for which we are granting a license, please put following notice at the foot of the page where you have used the mark, or if in a book, on the credits page. On any packaging or labeling, and on advertising or marketing materials, mark is a trademark of the Rust Foundation, registered in the United States and other countries, used with permission from the Rust Foundation. Okay. A little bit too legal lingo for me to have any comments on. What to do when you see abuse. If you are aware of any confusing use, misuse, or remarks in any way, we would appreciate you bringing it to our attention. Please contact us below. Where to get further information. If you have any questions about this policy, would like to speak with us about the use of our marks in ways not described in the policy, or see any abuse of our marks, please email trademark@rustfoundation.org. General considerations about trademarks and their use. What trademark law is about. What is a trademark? A trademark is a word, phrase, symbol, or design, or a combination of words, phrases, symbols, or designs that identifies and distinguishes the source of the goods of one party from those of others. A service mark is the same as a trademark, except that it identifies and distinguishes the source of a service rather than a product. Trade dress or get-up refers to the look and feel of the packaging, which in this context can include the layout, colors, images, and design choices in a web page. Throughout this policy, the terms trademark and mark refer to both trademarks, service marks, and trade dress. However, the use of a word is not as a trademark when it is used functionally as part of the software program, for example, in a file, folder, directory, or path name. Use in this way is not a trademark infringement, which basically means if you can still name your folder in your project Rust if you want, and it's not an infringement. What is the likelihood of confusion? There is trademark infringement if your use of a trademark has created a likelihood of confusion. This means using a trademark in a way that will likely confuse or deceive the relevant consuming public about the source of a product or service using the mark in question. For example, if the foo software extension removes all double spaces after periods, but someone else later creates foo software that adds a third space after periods, consumers would be confused between the two, and the newcomer will likely be a trademark infringer. As another example, if a company makes foobar software and a third party offers training called foobar certification, a person is likely to believe wrongly that the certification is being offered by the makers of foobar software. The third party has likely misled consumers about the source of its training and is a trademark infringer, which is what I talked about before. You have to, you're not allowed to mislead people, and that's most of what this policy is really about, making sure that people don't get the idea that it's okay to mislead others. Yeah, that's fine. What is nominative use? Referential use, nominative use, or nominative fair use, which is the name of the doctrine under US trademark law, allows the use of another's trademark where it is information necessary for understanding. This provision applies in the majority of countries with a trademark law. Other countries' trademark laws also have similar provisions. For example, a car repair shop that specializes in a particular brand of automobile, such as Volkswagen, must be allowed to say that they repair Volkswagen cars. Here is what you should consider when deciding whether your use of a trademark is a nominative fair use. Whether you can identify the product or service in question without using the trademark. Whether you are avoiding a likelihood of confusion in the way that you have used the trademark, and whether you have used only as much as is necessary to identify the product or service. With our foobar certification example above, the person offering the certification would be allowed to say, under the nominative fair use doctrine, that they are offering SNOW's certification for foobar software. It is also almost never the case that using a logo will be a nominative fair use, since it will be a rare case where the logo is needed for strictly informational purposes. So yeah, this is kind of where we get into, educational materials and stuff like that. And anywhere where you might have a conference regarding Rust, you can talk about the Rust language. You could talk about Volkswagen cars. You just have to make sure that you don't put it out as endorsed by the foundation. Proper trademark use. These rules hold true for all trademarks, not just ours, so you should follow them for our marks as well as anyone else's. Use of trademarks in text. Always distinguish trademarks from surrounding text with an initial capital letter. Unacceptable, Rust. Acceptable, Rust. I mean, a little bit weird wording here, because unacceptable Rust. Actually, this is the version that you can always use, because this is just the English word. This is the version which can get you in trouble. This is the version that can't get you in trouble. Depending on the context, of course, because they can still have lowercase Rust as a, as a trademark if it becomes obvious from the context that you are referring to capital Rust. But this use case is less likely to get you in trouble. This is more likely, because this will directly affiliate you with the Rust Foundation. Always use trademarks in their exact form with the correct spelling, neither abbreviated, hyphenated, or combined with any other word or words. Cargo. Cargo. Again, this is kind of like acceptable use. Well, you can actually, this is the version that you can use. This is the one that uses cargo. But based on context, this could become an issue. If you make a package manager called car-go, yes, they can maybe try to get you, enforce their trademark because you're too similar. Don't pluralize a trademark. Unacceptable. I am running 5 Rusts. I have 5 Rust compilers running. Okay. Always use a trademark as an adjective modifying a noun. You can see the nouns we prefer under our trademarks. Unacceptable. This is a cargo. Anyone can install it. Acceptable. This is the cargo package manager. Anyone can install it. That's just weird English anyway, so you shouldn't say that anyway. Don't use a trademark as a verb. Trademarks are products or services, never actions. Unacceptable. I rusted my program today. Acceptable. I compiled my program with a Rust compiler today. We have to make this a verb. We rusted something today. Let's make that a thing. Don't use a trademark as a possessive. Instead, the following noun should be used in possessive form or the sentence reworded so that there is no possessive. Cargo's desktop interface is very clean. The Cargo desktop's interface is very clean. I'm not even sure what they mean by this. Like, I understand what they mean, possessive versus, but just English-wise, I would say that these sentences are basically identical. Okay. Don't translate a trademark into another language. Quiero instalar Rust en mi sistema. Quiero instalar Oxido en mi sistema. Yeah, again, different languages. I'm unsure how far their copyright goes, because Oxido is not at all close to Rust. So it would be up to, say you're Spanish, then go to your trademarks, branch and try to trademark this if you want to. Because it's not up to Tauri to say, or Tauri, up to Rust to say whether or not you're allowed to use Oxido. It's up to the government to say whether this is okay or not. Use of logos. You may not change any logo except to scale it. This means you may not add decorative elements, change the colors, change the proportions, distort it, add elements, or combine it with other logos. However, when the context requires the use of black and white or grayscale graphics, and the logo is color, you may reproduce the logo in a manner that produces a black and white or grayscale image. You also provide versions of the logo in black and white and grayscale. These guidelines are based on the model trademark guidelines available at that website, used under a Creative Commons attribution. And there we go. Like an hour and a half later, I've read the entire policy that everyone is so upset about. There were some weird things in it, but overall, I really don't see what the big fuss is about, other than, as we talked about a little bit, the crate renaming. Because on Crates.io, the crate name should be permanent. Like, that's basically the assumption that people go by. And that is where I find that there could be cause for concern. The rest of it is primarily if you're already making products, if you're, there's a lot of things you can be doing already that could be affected by it, in which case you might need to be a bit careful and need to reconsider some stuff, but 99.9% of all users will not be affected by this at all. I don't even know any crates that are called explicitly Rust that will be having to change their names. Because remember, when you have a name, what the fuck was I gonna say? I'm so tired right now. But yeah, I don't see why people are so upset about this. This is fairly basic stuff that in most cases in this, they talk about your rights and how you can get the right to use their stuff. Compare that to something like Apple or Google. They don't give you this level of, they don't cater to you in this way at all. And for the most part, this policy isn't about granting you rights. It's about this explaining to you what they already have. They have the trademark. They're primarily just explaining to you how their trademark works. It's not meant to really change anything for anyone, anywhere. They already have these rights. They can already enforce these things. The policy isn't new. They already have these powers. It's not a change. It's just a declaration of what they already have. And it's a call for comments as well. They want comments. And I have found several cases in this document where there's just weirdness going on. Like there's definitely a space here, for example. There's some formatting errors and some language stuff that should be taken care of. But all in all, I wouldn't be too concerned if I was a regular user, which I am. And I don't think you should be concerned either at all. This is not a repeat of Hasbro's disaster with the OGL. This is just a statement. This is how trademark law works, and this is how we want to enforce it, the policy, how we see it, and we would like comments on it. They haven't enforced anything yet. They have the powers they have regardless, because it's already a registered trademark. You have the opportunity now to give them feedback and, maybe they can change some stuff in the policy, because they have a lot of room for how they enforce their policy and their trademarks. They do, but most of this comes down to whether or not they can actually enforce it. And as I say early on, for the most part, they're not interested in just petty squabbles and just enforcing it for the sake of enforcing it. I don't remember exactly where it was. I think it was here. In short, we will take a reasonable and proportional approach to enforcing the policy. In most cases, what this means is they'll talk to you, and if they feel like you've done something bad, they might ask you to change the name of your project, which is perfectly fine because you've done something bad. And if you haven't done anything bad, they probably won't bother you. So yeah, I've talked way too much about this policy already, I feel like, so we're gonna end it here. Bye.